think there's huge amount of exciting room for policy debate, and one hopes that the opposition parties will pick up. I think the Congress has a huge role in expanding this debate, in taking this debate to a higher level, and one hopes that when the manifesto comes, we will hopefully see some of that spirit of the old Congress reflected in the debate.
Welcome, everyone. Hi, sir. In this week's column, in this week's Raja Mohan, you looked at a very interesting sort of meta thing. You've connected it to the news, and we'll hopefully get that out of the questions on this changing vocabulary of India's foreign policy discourse. Particularly, one is changed circumstances, and then there's other reasons. And then we go into a little bit of the politics and how certain questions remain unasked for various reasons. Everyone should read the column. It is in-depth. It will be on the indianexpress.com. And of course, wherever you're watching this video, it should be in the description. So please do read that. So the first question, you give examples. As India, especially under the Modi government, it so happens that it is under the Modi government, of course, but the vocabulary is changed. There's two. So Vishwaguru is the most common one, which you haven't mentioned in the thing. We hear that internally more than externally. And there is this Vishwamitra instead of, say, strategic autonomy. No longer about non-aligned. As global south is something we're hearing, minilateral a lot more of, in ways that we weren't always, perhaps, we hadn't had that focus, both domestically as well as the way it's being articulated internationally by India's foreign policy establishment. So two questions. Is this only a function of India's relative economic rise, which we've been hearing for this India emerging story for about 2 decades, and it's finally come into fruition? Or is there also a sort of strategic confidence that comes with that, or is as overlaid on that? How do you see how has this come about?
No, in many ways, I think what you're seeing is a structural phenomenon that we've seen with all the previous rising powers. The way China talked about itself and its relationship with the world in the 1950s, even though it was a revolutionary power, is very different from the way it started talking about itself from the 2000s, when its rise was apparent, how it talked about the international system, its own role in reshaping the global order, taking new initiatives, Belt and Road, I mean, you name it, the projection of China's soft power. So I think, we've seen that before with a whole lot of other great powers, whether it was the United States, Great Britain before that, or France. Germany and Japan, too, did something similar, but both of them got defeated and had to accommodate to a less than a sovereign position in the US alliance system. So I think as your net weight grows in the international system, the elite needs to configure new sets of terminology to describe itself and its relationship with the rest of the world. For example, the US began by talking about non-alignment. George Washington, in his first presidential address, said, look, there's an old world of Europe which is ridden with power politics. We should not get involved. We should build ourselves up. But by the turn of the 20th century, when the US is the #1 industrial power, you have Teddy Roosevelt, you have the beginnings of a talk about America's manifest destiny, America's natural leadership in the world. And once the US had the capital, the need to organize the global trading system and its role in the 2 world wars. So in some ways, you can say this can be too deterministic. But the fact is, we've seen similar patterns with other rising powers, including in our own lifetime, in my own lifetime, of a China that has risen and has changed its vocabulary, how it talks about the world. I think in India, we're seeing that beginning to happen. While the rise, you can almost say, emerged was there from the 1990s, the language remained locked in the old framework. We offer strategic autonomy, we offer non-alignment. So the Congress governments actually did not really abandon the old language. While the last 10 years, we've seen, as India's overall growth has consolidated, the Modi government actually discarding some of the old tropes and actually coming up with new ideas and new emphases that have begun to emerge. So you could say the rise has gone on for 30 years. Today, India is in a different position. And I think that along with that, we've seen the use of new vocabulary. Of course, the point we're making in the article is while the government is talking about it, it is yet to filter down into the larger political class. This is where one hopes the other political parties respond to it, either positively or negatively, begin to reflect on India's position, changing position in a changing world.
And that I should tell everyone who's watching that you should read this piece and watch this video probably in conjunction with the last one. Because there, I mean, the two pieces have a similar kind of thing and you'll get a much better, more in-depth understanding. So the second thing, you allude to this wolf warrior, China has been criticized somewhat recently with this sort of what's being called based on those movies, wolf warrior diplomacy, which is this aggressive kind of, shout down anyone who says anything anti-China, broadly, and very crassly put. And there has been a sense that in some ways there's a hint of that coming from India. But the difference is, even now in relative power, I mean, when China starts emerging, it was arguably it had done much more both economically and strategically in terms of its military industrial complex than India has. That sort of biding your time, stay silent, that Deng Xiaoping kind of thing. And they bided their time enough, and that there is an element, perhaps because of domestic politics, or maybe it seems that way when we're sitting in India, thinking about how India's external orientation, that you may be jumping the gun just a bit. That there are still, as you point out in the article, our per capita income is not where it needs to be. We're still, broadly speaking, a middle income or lower middle income country, measured by many huge inequality and other things. So how do you see that kind of the difference?
Yeah, I think, that India's language today is certainly assertive. For example, we saw the way External Affairs Minister Jaishankar talks about India, its positions, and the willingness to defend controversial Indian positions, controversial from the Western perspective, for example, on the question of India's oil purchases from Russia or its relationships with other countries. So I think there is a level of confidence. And I think the difference between China's wolf warrior diplomacy, which is really aggressive, attacking other statements, to one actually, I think what we've seen in the case of India is, Indians still speak better English than a lot of other people.
Yeah.
There is a way of smart way of putting things down or defending oneself. So what we've seen is, unlike China, which was beginning to lock itself into confrontation with its neighbors and challenging the Western, American domination of Asia, but India is actually building a relationship with the West today.
Yeah.
Is doing more things positive with the West. So and it does it still with a panache and style still, which is really in the end, while many are surprised that it is also conveying that India's look can't be pushed around. So it is still below the, I would say, in a reasonably good place.
Yeah.
Of course, people are right to worry that we shouldn't get into that wolf warrior kind of mode. But in the case of Maldives, we've talked about it before, where the government was very cautious. But the way the Indian social media went on against Maldives, as if we can make Maldives disappear from our neighborhood, I think the tendency is there, hyper-nationalist tendency is there within our public discourse. But the government itself, I think, has been very cautious, very firm, very assertive in terms of defense of its positions, but at the same time, sticking to some broad boundaries where it is still something that's taken seriously rather than offensively.
This last question actually is connected to both now this column and last one. We had a letter to the editor, which had argued something to the effect of one of the reasons for the new vocabulary in the opposition's inability to own the foreign policy discourse as part of a larger history, like you point out, coalition governments. Almost every party in India can take some credit because they've been part of ruling coalition since the 1990s in some form or another. Every major political party is that because of the political orientation of this government, which is the first truly non-Nehruvian government, one could argue that it hasn't bought into that argument in terms of the state, is that since the government has presented everything as a decisive break, including in foreign policy, or a new movement for new India, which is one of the things, how does the opposition has been unable to actually lay claim to that? Is that oh yes, it was a break, everything before was either better or worse, or everything after? You think that is one of the challenges as we're going into this kind of?
No, yeah. I think partly the opposition's inertia and the sense of polarization, a sense of, pick holes in what the government is saying. I mean, that's what most of the time opposition is supposed to do.
Yeah.
But in this case, where larger national goals are being set, and, a sense of nation's self-image is being mobilized, it is smarter for the opposition not to quibble about the data, okay, this economist sitting abroad come and say, look, okay, this data maybe, looks suspicious. To one, that's not the function of the Congress party to quibble about data. The Congress party is a governing party. Should say, look, we've contributed. We own Narasimha Rao. We own Manmohan Singh. We were the ones who started this process of transforming India. In some sense, you don't see that. I mean, that look, it is we have started this. It is the path that Manmohan Singh and Narasimha Rao started, reoriented the foreign policy that is giving us the results.
Yeah.
A second, I think, has been the tendency, I think, in the Congress party, we don't want to be a major power, power is not our thing. That's not fully true. I mean, I think if you go back to Nehru himself, Nehru talks about India in a great power terms.
Yeah.
But I think somewhere down the line in the 70s and the 80s, and we saw in the 2000s, just when India's rise, I mean, India began to hit 9% growth rate. The Congress sensibility was one of saying, no, we don't want to be major power. So I think that in a sense ceded some ground to the BJP, that on a clearly when a nation wants to feel good, why are you ceding that space? Purely from an opposition perspective. It's a claim that, look, we are on the move. Because irrespective whether you want to be a major power or not, that's the point we're making that. When you hit $4 trillion and you're going to hit $5 trillion, you're going to cross Japan and Germany, then you are in a different position objectively in the international system, whether you want it or not. Some liberals say, look, we should not be a great power. India's whole job is to be representing the underprivileged. But the fact is, your power position is changing in the international hierarchy. So if that is a reality, I think acknowledging the reality makes sense. What the Congress or the opposition parties need to do is really to say, look, okay, we're going to be third. And, because of the fall in the exchange rate of Japan, Germany is in a technical recession. In fact, they're going to make it much easier for India to cross them. It's going to happen very soon. But the thing is to say, look, we are a distant third.
Yeah.
We welcome the fact that India is going to become number 3, but we are a distant third. The gap between us and China is too large, and we need to work hard to catch up.
Yeah.
So an exhortative, more political mobilization to achieve higher goals should be the task of those who want to, Congress party has been a governing party of any party, to say that, look, we want to reach higher heights. And then you say, the second point we made, that while per capita, while you are the third largest economy, per capita income is low. And when the Prime Minister says we want to be a developed nation, say at least $10,000 to $12,000 GDP, that involves 4 times more per capita GDP.
Yeah. Yeah.
So let's say, look, what does the opposition party have to say? How do we get there?
Yeah.
What changes do we need to make? What reforms do we need to make? Because the goal is good.
Yeah.
To deny that goal is self-defeating. Welcome the goal and argue about how we get there. What are the things we need to do? And today, I think what's happened is getting from $3,000 per capita to $12,000 per capita involves changing one hell of a lot of things.
Yeah.
So there, I think that automatically then connects to your economic policy, your industrial policy, your technological policy. So there's room here to debate. It's not as if the BJP owns everything, but I think there has to be an engagement on that issue. Because today, in our world today, India has never been as connected to the world.
Yeah.
At $4 trillion GDP, almost 40% of it is trade. We're connected to the world. Therefore, our foreign policy and our domestic policy are deeply tied today. So I think the goal of a developed nation gives a lot of room for the opposition parties to say, this is our pathway to get there. We must get there with reduced inequality.
Yeah.
We must get there with less pain, or we must get there faster. So I think there's huge amount of exciting room for policy debate. And one hopes that the opposition parties will pick up. Historically, if you looked at this, the left parties always began, the communists.
Yeah.
This is the international situation. This is where India is.
Yeah.
So this is where our strategy is. Okay, they might have got it wrong, right, most of the time, but that's a different story. And the Congress party, for a long time, is a 100-plus-year-old party. The annual resolutions on the world affairs, on foreign policy, really laid out a structure. But I think Congress itself, in some of that has been lost. But I think today, given the positive moment at which India is, I think the Congress has a huge role in expanding this debate, in taking this debate to a higher level. And one hopes that when the manifesto comes, we will hopefully see some of that spirit of the old Congress reflected in the debate.
Let's hope they listen to you, sir. Everyone, we will see you next week with the column. Thank you so much, sir.